and welcome to today's D-Series webinar. My name is Carly. I'm the Entrepreneurship Program Manager for UCSF Rosenman Institute, and I'm so excited to introduce our guest today, the very talented Nicolle Cannon, who is founder and CEO of Cannon Quality Group. Nicolle has a degree in mechanical engineering from Cal Poly and began her career as a quality engineer and took on engineering and leadership roles for a large medical device company. During this time as an engineer, she grew frustrated with quality systems and quality organizations that were built on fear of the regulation. So in 2009, she founded Cannon Quality Group with the primary focus of aiding new safe technologies into the clinic fast so they can help improve the lives of patients. Nicolle and her team are experts on quality management and how to implement smarter systems that add value to businesses. And today she will be sharing her knowledge on when to initiate an eQMS and the factors to think about. Nicolle will take your questions throughout her presentation, so please share any questions you have in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. And Nicolle, the stage is now yours.
All right, thank you. That was a wonderful introduction. I'm going to start with a poll question, and you'll see it come up on the side of your screen around, because what I want to understand before we get started is just where you all are in your product commercialization timeline, because it helps me understand possibly what you're grappling with in the search for an eQMS. I can see you guys starting to do that, and while that comes in, I'm going to do a little bit about us. Carly hit a great deal of it, and just wanted to highlight that our focus is to create quality solutions that are sustainable and realistic and digestible for organizations that work in the medtech space, and with the goal of taking fear out and also appreciating the timeline and milestones that you grapple with. Quality is not a step function. It's a curve that has to work with your business and help you get to the end goal of helping patients, and that's our priority when we want to help organizations like yourselves. Before we jump in, and as you guys continue, it looks like I have most of my poll questions. I had one thing I wanted to share. I've been doing these webinars, and I don't know if you guys noticed, but right here behind me, there's a picture frame that is empty. And I had to get help putting this whole thing together because I have no skill in setting up any of this stuff. But 2020, we started doing these things virtually. I had to get something going on. But I realized just last week that I still have these frames. I have 4 of these frames like that. They're empty. And I noticed that my daughter was starting to do some painting. So I asked her if since she finished one yesterday, if she would do some painting for me. So I have pumpkins. I'm going to put that up. I got that today, so I'm excited to share that. You guys are the first ones I'm sharing with. Very excited. Actually, you're not. I had shared it with my all hands today too, which was fun to share. Okay, we get rolling. It looks like we have most of you are in first in human and a good deal in first submission and prototype. So that's helpful. I know where you're at. When the decision to select an eQMS is difficult, and I understand as a business owner you get a lot of requests to bring software solutions into your organization, and then of course you add that to this nebulous decision around quality management systems and when do I start investing both time and resources into a quality management system, and where does that meet an eQMS? And I appreciate that, as a leader, you have few funds and you have few people, and in the stages you're at and trying to navigate when to bring, and a lot of times, and then which one, those kind of go hand in hand. Should you be making a decision we got more submissions. I'm watching the poll come in to my left over here. Becomes a big part of the question. So today I'm gonna tackle that with 3 approaches that we're going to talk about. One is whenever I talk to somebody, whenever I'm helping coach someone to the eQMS solution, the first thing I ask is why? What is the problem you're trying to solve by bringing in an eQMS? And we'll dig into this. And then secondly, the other factor that we're going to talk about is who and what is the makeup of your organization and your product. And then the third point that we'll get into is when when are your company and product milestones? Where are you trying to get to? Now, before we dig in, I have one more poll question for you that I will launch. And give me a second. There you go. Because I want to understand a little bit about, now that I know where you are in your life cycle, I want to understand a little bit about your personal experiences with eQMS. Is it something you've never done it before? Okay. Some people are nervous, past experiences, and then some people just are kicking the can down the road. They know they should, but don't know where, when best time to start, which is why we're here. Okay, good. I'm saying that most of you have never done it before. So let's dig into the first tactic that I focus on, and that is, what problem are you trying to solve? A lot of people, I think most of you, maybe if you've never done it before, you might fall in that bottom category. There's this assumption that we are starting our quality system, so we should start that in an eQMS. Sometimes people are already in there, and you all might be, given that you're in that first in man stage and in the submission stage, you've already been working together as a team. So you're finding that you need a unified place to collaborate and work. Most of you, it seems like, probably already have some set of structure rolling, especially if you're first in man. You have some kind of doc control, you have some form of design control process running. And so you've probably already started to put parts of your quality system in place. And these are going to be the things that you might be starting to think about. So as you unpack what the problem is you're trying to solve, I think at this point you want to be, are your processes slowing you down? So that's, you're working in processes, they're getting you to where you are. And I'm trying not to jump ahead into the next factors. But when you think about an eQMS, because this is also going to feed into what solution you should pick, is why am I even thinking about picking a solution right now? What is the problem that we're finding ourselves running into that we might be, we might feel an eQMS is the solution? And then that's going to lead us into what's it going to take to get in that solution. I'm going to pause right now. If anybody wants to ask a question, because this is really where you're living, like you're not really sure what problem you're solving, or you're really clear what problem you're solving, and then we can talk about, we can bring that into the next pieces of the tactics. And I'm realizing, oh, there we go. Okay, no open questions right now. I got the questions up. So before I move into the second tactic, when I talk to some examples of the innovators, when I talk to them about this, and a lot of times it's in this last place where we're starting to implement our quality system, so we should start an eQMS. I think some of the problems that come up that really highlight it might be time to consider an eQMS is really the amount of people that you have in your system. And when I say system, I mean starting to work in your quality system, starting to do, and training is really a big place of that, because training is tracking training and keeping everybody trained as you grow your organization, as you get from that first in concept, first in man, and get closer to your submission goals. You're trying to build your structure. And so the burden of keeping up doc control and training starts to become an entry point for people into their eQMS. Design control also starts to be an aspect of a process that triggers people wanting to move into an eQMS. And again, depending on which system you pick, that one is easier to do sooner than later. There are certain systems that are harder to migrate into if you're using a paper system. So that's something to think about if you're on the earlier side and have and really just want to get that hygiene going and know you have a solution that is going to have an embedded design control process. I think I'm thinking of a couple of solutions right now where you build your product specs, you build your risk analysis right into the solution. So transferring it will be something to think about with regards to the timing, because it'll result in more resource constraints. The other processes that drive it is supplier controls. If you're a product, a client, or if your product has numerous components and interactions with a lot of suppliers, the desire to have a portal where your suppliers can get the most current documentation sooner. So if for the people that have a first in man, if you're leveraging a lot of outsource suppliers, then having a portal, sometimes the suppliers themselves have a portal, but then that becomes overwhelming. You can have them work in your portal and have one source of truth, then that ends up being helpful. Question that came in, we have a QMS consultant guiding us and recently hired a part-time doc control. When do we need to consider ramping an experienced quality professional to lead this function? I'm going to save that one for a little bit later. That's a good one to integrate into the eQMS. But now I stopped, so I'm going to answer it. When we're entering clinical and 510(k) in about a year from now. So when you're looking to have, this question is kind of, the eQMS is going to come along with this person. Usually, I'd imagine, unless maybe Tim, you can let me know if you guys already have an eQMS. It's probably, I'm not sure. Let me know if you already have an eQMS or not. So you're early on, you have a doc control person, you have a consultancy, you want to ramp your experienced professional to lead the function. And no eQMS, Google Drive, normal. Yeah, lots of people start in Drive. I think so. 510(k)s with with human data, looks like the clinical. The way I look at the burden of your quality system is going to go up depending on how much you're going to produce for that clinical study. And if that clinical study is supporting a 510(k), which is the assumption I'm making, how many units you have to build, and if you're building them in-house or not. I think those are, so it's kind of branching off into a different discussion, meaning, what are the factors to think about when you're going to need more support from a leader, and the milestones. The 510(k) is a good one because you're going to need your system in by then. You're going to need more of your quality system in to support those clinical builds. If you're outsourcing the clinical builds, a little less of your system. A consultancy can get you, as long as they're a diverse consultancy and have basically a virtual team. The virtual team can lift you up. I think it's important because that clinical piece can go up and down. You don't know really how well that clinical is going to go until you do it. You don't know how long it's going to take you to get to that submission acceptance. And those are volatile milestones. I always think it's important to be in positions as a business owner myself, where your staffing support can go up and down with those milestone changes, right? So if you learn something in the clinical that's going to set you back into R&D, that's a good factor to think about before growing your organization and growing the burn. And then those milestones also connect with the eQMS decision. So what I'll go to the next factor, and that is who is in your organization, and what's the makeup of your organization and your product. So thinking about when you're at an early stage and you're still leveraging, very small resources that most of you, it sounds like, probably are when you're in early first in man stage, that the things to be thinking about is the people you have in your organization, the people you're thinking about bringing. What's their background? Have they been in a medical device company before, or Medtech or pharma? Do they have any experience in the regulated space? And did they use a system? Again, I'm going to keep going back to the eQMS piece. Did they use a system at that organization? And was their experience, kind of like why I asked the poll questions, was their experience good with that system or bad with that system? And knowing the makeup of your people is important, because then the uptick in learning curve and how much time and money you have to spend to get them into that system and using that system. And if you have somebody, if you're going to pick a solution that a good deal of your R&D organization already doesn't like, that's not going to go great, right? You want, as a business leader, you want to have as minimal friction as you can, especially in your development and execution of your goals. So you want to make sure you understand, and whoever is helping you make that decision, if your quality leader is helping you make a decision, that they understand who the makeup of your organization is. What's the background? What's the experience? What are our users like? Have they used it before? Have they not? You know, the other side of that is people with team members that have very little experience. Their expectation on the software front is probably a lot further than some of these eQMS solutions are at, because the eQMS solutions are still threading the needle between very paper-based conservative people who are individuals who are afraid to get into a software solution, and very advanced software people. And so when you have if you have a team that has very little experience and potentially software in your product, then they're going to want a solution that is advanced and maybe more like some of their normal tools they use in the day-to-day. And so may get very frustrated with the limitations of what the eQMS that is selected is. So this is, again, going back to the people. Who is driving your quality department, and who are the individuals in the rest of your organization, and what are their experiences? What have they used? And then adding on top of that what your product has. So if you have a software product, also, I always go back to, I was really happy when eQMS has started to build in the Salesforce platform, because when I was in industry, the sales team was always the hardest one to get information from, and yet also very critical when you're dealing with complaints and recalls. And now that's very far from where you guys are right now, but that was a benefit to me of them building a tool in a platform that the sales team was already using. And I'm using that analogy because when you have software in your product, you have your software team working in solutions that are that they're comfortable using. So you want to make sure you have a way to integrate their software development into your eQMS, not that you're going to have them go backwards. You want to meet them where they're at, and that's really important when you're factoring when and which solution to bring in. And it comes into the when because you have to decide when you're going to interact, when you're going to want to start capturing that software information. And again, at the end of the day, as a business leader, the content of the design is very important for you to have control over. And if you have software in your product, the likelihood is you really want a software solution to help you capture that as you go out and start talking to investors and looking to get that next level of funding. What they're most interested in, or if you're already talking to strategics, they're interested in is a control over one of the things they're interested in a lot of things. I'm not going to pretend that I'm going to capture all of them in this statement. I don't mean that. But from the quality side, what they're interested in, or from product side, is they want to make sure you have control of that development, that you have control of what it is that you're promising to them and that you're going to commit to the FDA. And so sometimes that goes back to making sure you have processes, which are either the quality management system processes, which include an eQMS. And in this case, if you're going to have software in your product, finding a way to have a repeatable control of it so you know what it is and you can hand it over if you get a deal with a strategic, or your funders can have confidence that they are investing in a stable product and they can keep taking it to that next level because you know what's in it. Other things to think about is also, I wrote on this slide, tons of components, which means lots of times tons of suppliers. So when you're thinking about when to bring in an eQMS, again, I know these don't seem necessarily straightforward, but sometimes it's when are you going to start interacting with all suppliers? when do you need all that communication? When do you need clear documentation that they can access? You don't have, if you're working, Google Drive is great. I use it in a lot of scenarios with a lot of clients. But if I have a client who's building a large imaging system for the future of cancer, for example, that's the size of a building, has a lot of components and there are a lot of suppliers. That company in an early stage would benefit from having one source of truth that they can give their suppliers access to, that you're not, all your engineers aren't like going to take time taking the copy, emailing it to the supplier or slacking it to the supplier. They have a place, a portal they can go to that's secure and safe, and it's in the process of approval, and everyone, because you're going to have numerous people interacting with very similar components. You might have numerous suppliers on one component, or embedded components and sub-assemblies. I'm going to pause there and leave it if there's any questions before from the first two tactics, which is really getting a sense of why you're even on this, have this question. Why are we thinking about an eQMS? And then the next piece is considering who's in your organization and what product you have that starts to factor into the decision of when. Okay. And I'll jump into, I'm not seeing questions come in just yet. I will jump into my last thing that I tend to think about, which is when are your company and product milestones? And this has a couple of different purposes that you're looking for. First is the product milestones, like I asked in the first poll question, which is trying to understand what your product milestones are, which drive timelines, and then what your product milestones and your company milestones. So maybe you have an initial 510K, but your goal is to do a human after that, and a second 510K, or maybe a PMA iteration on your product, or you're going to add a drug to it, or you have a long strategic path. So based on those milestones, there may be a better time to invest in both the cost of the eQMS, but also the implementation cost, meaning your resources. Because at the end of the day, your resources are going to be affected by bringing this on. And at any point, you're either going to, if you do it too soon, very early on, which some people might be, on the sooner side, you're going to carry the cost burden of it. If you do it on the later side, there's a cost burden of it. So when you think about what your milestones are, what your goals are for your product, and the timing, there will be times that are that is less intensive, and you have more space in your organization to spend time putting the product in. Sometimes people wait until after they submit, because then you have a good space of 1 to 3 months where your organization could feasibly now integrate. Now the challenge is at that point you've gotten yourself through a design history file. At the end of the day, it's is that what you're going to be weighing is that big of a deal? It really depends on how fast you're moving after that point. And if you're moving fast, some people move right from submission and commercialization. So then their organization is going to be spending a lot of time getting that commercial engine ready while the submission gets clearance. So for those organizations, doing it sooner would be better, or much earlier, actually, like in the design control side of things, so that you can not go backwards and not spend a lot of time moving your resources into moving us in, changing from one process into another, uploading or importing data and validating, getting used to new habits. So lots of times, some of the things I think about for milestones, if you're ready to freeze your design and start spending money to develop or raising money to develop, depending on the strategy and next phases of your milestones, might be a good time, right? If you're in one where you're after clearance, you're going to iterate pretty fast or get right into commercial. Once you've committed to that design, is a good time to think about your quality management system and then think about the electronic quality management system. If you're on a longer path where your concept is frozen, but you know there's going to be a lot of our work to get to a point where you've locked your feasibility, and maybe you're going to do some animals. That sounds like somebody who might make an organization that's going to have a long tail. It might be worth waiting until a later milestone. You're further along, because you really have to gamble that success and timelines and on the burden you're going to carry with the costs. And some people say that you can lower the cost by having less users, which is very true. And that's just something to think about once you know what system you're going into. That's where these two things kind of go hand in hand, in the sense of what solution are you picking also can drive the time. And again, what your company and product milestones. Sometimes, like I mentioned earlier, another company milestone is raising Series A or looking for a strategic partner. I know in those scenarios, sometimes they want to know that the design is what they're paying for is going to have more value when it's locked into a system, and because it gives them less risk when they know it's under a certain design control. Back in the day, they used to make people get ISO certified early on, so they knew a stability. That is less and less now, thankfully, because I think that was a high cost burden. But there are aspects of your quality system, and then again, that might drive into your eQMS, depending on which one you're going to go with, if you want to show a proven design is following regulation. The timing around when you need to start tracking data to really avoid big mistakes also comes in with the size of your product. So this is another aspect of your product that I think about that drives when you're going to go into that eQMS. If you have a larger potential for misinformation, which comes with product complexity, so it kind of goes back to the point, my second point, which is like the makeup of your product, is the more that you have in that product, the more data you have, the more variables you have, then there's more chance for misses. So you're going to be wanting to be in a tool that has more traceability on the design, risk, component level, software level, where you have so many things interacting that if one thing changes, you don't want to depend on human error to catch it. You really want to get the safety of it being in a system and having that data. So if you want to avoid those mistakes earlier because of the risk level of those mistakes and the pace of your product implementation or milestones, that's something to think about. Another piece of it is, again, going back to the company milestones, is your overall vision for your organization and company management, and having the tools you need to manage the data that the quality system is holding. And again, this is about de-risking the owner or the leader's space, right? So if you're at a point where you're building your infrastructure because you're building an organization and you want to have controlled processes and data, the sooner you get your organization into that hygiene and practice, people argue that that's a good foundation for your organization. So that's a reason to think about doing it sooner. You just want, and this comes with your experience. If you're coming, I know leaders who have who are these repeat entrepreneurs, and they've done this enough that they know which solution they want to start with. They know which processes they want to start with. So it's worth the time and money from the beginning. And they know that. And there's plenty of repeat entrepreneurs who also wait until much later. So these are kind of decisions, and I'm probably not making it easier to make the decision when I bring up all the variables in this way. But I do think these are all the factors to think about, and all the factors that I try to think about when I'm helping somebody make this decision of when and which. You really have to think about, so a couple more I think of when it comes to company milestones and product milestones is, again, going back to that, if you're looking for funding, you're building credibility with your board and your investors. If you make it easy to absorb and strategic partner friendly, if they can go in and look at aspects, if they can look at your design, you have your data easily accessible, you can have dashboards, where are we on testing, how are we doing on the development testing, so that they know the answers sooner. What's the dates on the clinical trial, knowing that there's a controlled aspect to it. And again, this goes with the complexity of your device and your milestones and the commitment, right? When you have bigger money commitments, like a PMA study that you're going to need, or even the extensive biocompatible animal studies sometimes are enough for investors to want to know that there's stability in your recipe, as people analogize, or in your processes. Then that is a factor to be weighing. I'm going to pause, see if there's any questions right now. Doing a lot of talking by myself. My dog is not snoring anymore, which is great. Those are the three factors. So we're a little earlier. We're going to move into the Q&A part. Just to sum it up. So when you're thinking about when it's time to bring in an eQMS, and again, which eQMSs really go hand in hand. The first thing I want you to think about is what problem you're trying to solve with eQMS, or the person who's asking you to bring in an eQMS. What is the problem they're trying to solve? Just because you have a quality management system does not necessarily mean you're ready for an eQMS, or you're going to start a quality management system, you need an eQMS. It doesn't mean you don't, but I think it's important to really get clear, both just for the business in general and yourselves before you make an investment, on what problem are you trying to solve with an eQMS. And that's going to answer a couple of things. That's going to help you start to answer when and also answer which. Again, these are both pieces need to go hand in hand. I think with like any software solution that we choose in our businesses, you don't want to take it lightly, especially the eQMS, because you're going to be embedded in that. It's like a PLM or a system. You're going to be embedded in that for a while. So you want to pick something that and you want to put enough thought into it so that you pick something that will take you further. Switching between them is not something that is that easy to do. There's some that make it very difficult, like all softwares. Secondly, who and what is the makeup of your organization and product? Who do you have on your team? Who do you envision hiring on the team? Are you looking for all experienced people? So they're going to come in with, preconceived notions of quality system and an electronic quality system and how it should function. Or do they have no experience, which is great also, and because it's a clean slate, but it also comes in with expectations of software in our world and how it's handled and what an eQMS solution can do. So it's really, the two ends of the spectrum are important, and the middle is important. If you're going to have a merging of experience and non-experience, the team needs to be considered in picking it. And then also that drives timing. Sometimes with people without experience, it's better to start it sooner and get it into that hygiene sooner. Sometimes with people with experience, they can tolerate getting into it later because they've done it before and they're fine transitioning, and it's not as big of a shift from a hygiene level of processes and practices. Because again, an eQMS is really a process tool. And if you have processes already in place, how much are they going to have to change, and how much can the people change? And then what is your product? What is the burden of your product? How many different components are you managing? How many people need to support your product? Suppliers need to support your product. And those things, those answers will drive if it means that you need to interact sooner with an eQMS, like I mentioned with suppliers. If you're going to interact with a lot of suppliers, it's better to have one source of truth that they can go to. You don't have different people putting that information in there. I bring that up because sometimes people can say, oh, I'll just create a Google Drive or a Dropbox or Box location and I'll send them there. But then you have numerous engineers doing that and forgetting which version they shared with whom. And then you apply that to the software world, and you can quickly lose track of the product that you're developing, which is the core fundamental of what you're doing right now. And you want to solidly make sure that you're moving that forward. So how many suppliers are you working with, and also what are the components of your system? Are you just a hardware system? Are you hardware and a software system, hardware, software, and a drug? Are you a service added on top of that, and making sure that all pieces of your product you're thinking about if that eQMS should come sooner or later. And then as you get into your company and product milestones, and then where is the strategic process for that product to get clearance, and the timeline for that clearance, and where are my risk moments and the milestones up until that clearance, to figure out if it's worth carrying to software burden. Can I get my product risks managed using not an eQMS? And then at a certain point, once we get past a certain milestone, your confidence and goes up that your risks are going down, and it's worth investing. And then the other milestone timing I think about is even if you have a simple product without a lot of interactions with outside bodies, what pace and what moments is my organization going to be able to take on bringing on an eQMS? And then that goes back to, who's in my organization? Do I have experienced people or not experienced people? So it really needs to be catered to your organization and your product. Looking at the timeline, when does it make sense, and what solutions should you be, like what qualities or what solutions should you be thinking about? So when it's time, you know why you've made that decision, and you can target it into there. So at that point, I'm gonna pause. I am going to open it up to questions. Carly, I don't know if you want to come back. I want to say thank you. Tell you guys two quick things. Sorry, Carly. One, we do have our 2022. It's a little late infographic around all the eQMS solutions. If you're interested in it, just email us and we'll send it to you. You can try and grab this link. It's also it's not on the website yet, so we'll be releasing it soon. But that's just our current assessment of a bunch of a handful of the eQMSs that are out there right now. So that would help you if you're really in the thick of it right now. And then I also just always like to point people to one of our products, which is a compliance essentials for startups. And this is just a base beginning processes. It's not an eQMS. It's the initial early SOPs that will help you get yourself running as you get going. So I will leave it for questions now.
I have some I can ask you here.
Okay.
Do you have any tips for how to evaluate which vendor is the best for QMS needs?
One of the first things is if you have software in your product. So if you have software in your product, focus on finding an eQMS that works with, integrates well with wherever your software team is living. That's ideal. You don't want to get them, have to convert. The other things to think about are is the supplier piece. If you have a lot of components and a lot of supplier communication, finding a solution that's going to ease that. You're not going to need to, I mean, some solutions don't let you have supplier access. Some solutions make it difficult for them to come in and get the information they need. So if you're going to have a lot of that, it's really important. Also, just the traceability matrix, tracing what your product development requirements are through the process, through risk. If you have a complex product and you can see a lot of changing, and be beneficial to have software trace that for you. And sometimes those can go outside of an eQMS. So I don't want to say that eQMS will solve it, but some of them are solving that now. And it'd be great if you could use that or leverage that strength.
That's great. Thank you. And then what are some of the biggest mistakes you see people make?
I think, one of the ones coming to mind is that someone going from a large organization, starting a small organization and buying an eQMS solution that is suited for a large organization at the start of his small organization. And then they just sat on it. They never used it. So I think, not getting your team involved in the decision, or thinking about your team, and thinking about, I think, you really should have somebody, or hire somebody, however it works, somebody on your team who can help you navigate the solutions. I think a lot of these providers are now selling straight to CTOs and CEOs, and then they end up buying solutions that get them committed to something they don't want. So for example, there are solutions out there that make it difficult for you to get your design out of the software, which makes it difficult to share it with contract manufacturers. Or if you don't know. So at the end of the day, making sure that you work with somebody. If you don't know yourself what a quality management solution should have it, and you don't know your team, and you don't know your product, and really know what the software should do for you, working with somebody can help you understand that and work through the pros and cons of the different solutions for your product and your milestones, so that you know what you're weighing and what are going to be. Because with every software, they don't all do everything, right? They do some things great, and they do other things that aren't great, and you have to weigh them.
Awesome. And I have, does anybody else have any questions? But I'll ask one more, which is, where can people ask you questions one-on-one coming up here at the Rosenman Institute?
Yes, exactly. We have our office hours at the Rosenman Institute. And then once those slots fill up, they can certainly reach out, quality@canningqg.com. If you want to set some time up, we can certainly set some time up and talk through, kind of help you get oriented and help you navigate this. It's a big decision. So, and I'm pretty passionate about it, which is why we do our eQMS series. We're always trying to educate people on all the solutions. It's a big one. Of course.
And I just put the link in the chat for those expert consult sessions. Nicolle will be joining us. It's all virtual on Zoom, and you can come, and if you are selected for one of the slots, you can have your questions answered on January 19th. So please check that out. Wait just another moment here for more questions to come in, if there are any. But if there are not, Nicolle, it was so wonderful to have you, and we hope you all will join us next month for our next webinar with the team from Brown Rudnick, who will be joining us on November 17th. Again, Nicolle is available in January, and like she said, feel free to reach out to her if you have any other questions as well. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you.
Thank you. Bye.